Good evening and welcome to the Arundel Camera Club live stream for Wednesday, April 28th, 2021. My name is John Milliker and I'm the club president for the 2020-2021 season. The Arundel Camera Club was founded in 1957 and exists to promote the arts, science, and education in all aspects and fields of photography. Normally we meet at 7 p.m. every Wednesday evening during the school year in Severna Park, Maryland. However, with the current disruptions, we've decided to continue business as normal in a virtual space, which allows us to protect our members and guests from the current COVID-19 situation. For more information about us, please visit www.arundelcameraclub.org. Before we move on to our schedule, I want to thank everyone for coming out on Saturday to our meet and shoot at Fort Smallwood Park. We had a total of 20 people, including a few new members. I've seen many amazing photos from the day, and because I've already been asked when the next one is, we're going to go back to the same spot on Saturday, May 22nd, and be sure to mark your calendars now. Also, in your email, you have a link to the contest theme survey, and we ask that you take the time to go in and pick your favorite theme ideas for next year's contests. Please fill this out by this Friday, April 30th, so that our club officers can sort the results in time to announce them at our business meeting. And speaking of our business meeting, all of our members have received the connection information for the business meeting next week, as well as our agenda and a description of the topics we'll be voting on. Please take the time to read over this and make sure to join us for a conference-only stream next Wednesday, May 5th at 7 p.m. This member meeting will not be streamed to Facebook or YouTube. Everyone who is a registered member, no matter if you are a paid account or free membership, has received this email and is encouraged to attend. There will be a practice conference stream using the same connection information on Sunday, May 2nd at 7 p.m. And here's our program's chair, Christine Milliker, with our upcoming schedule. Christine.
Good evening. As John mentioned, next week on May 5th is our yearly business meeting, and it won't be streamed to Facebook. Please see the email sent this morning for the details and the connection information for both the business meeting and the practice stream. May 12th will be our club events contest. Please keep an eye out for an email from Lewis with a list of eligible events and the deadline in which to submit them. Our April photo assignment is spring, and the deadline to get those in is by our business meeting on May 19th. Votes will be tallied, and we'll have a discussion session during our virtual banquet on Wednesday, May 26th. May 19th, John Milliker is working on a presentation, and our previous speaker had to cancel, so John is going to fill in for us. So he'll get back to me with the topic and full information. Tonight we have our very own Bob Weber giving a presentation on hidden colors, where he will be talking about experimental exploration of the color curve tool. Bob says his first imaging contraption was a cardboard box with a lens from his grandmother's opera glasses at one end and a piece of photosensitive paper partially exposed and brought home by his mother from her office at the other. The image of their garden in Ghana didn't last, as parents weren't too keen on their 10-year-old messing around with chemistry. His curiosity into understanding anything mechanical had already proved very destructive, particularly to clocks. His first serious camera was a hand-me-down from his mother, something like an Eastman Kodak Duoflex twin lens reflex that took 620 film in about 1950. That was followed by a Kodak Instamatic 126 for his 14th birthday. He started to take photography seriously in 1971 when he got his first SLR. At Oxford College, the college had a fully equipped darkroom which was hardly ever used. This was an ideal opportunity to learn the whole black and white process from start to finish. This time, having left home, he had access to all the necessary chemistry. And in the mid-70s to mid-80s, he would shoot slides and even develop color prints from these slides, producing lovely 8x10s. Over the years, he traded up SLRs and added more lenses and features such as light meter to the camera, then auto exposure, switched to Canon in 1981. And he joined ACC in 2014 and has realized that most of his early work was really journal photography, such as recording life and travel. And there has always been an interest in macro and flowers, with and without the bugs. And today his interest is set pieces and art photography. And here is Bob for this evening's presentation. Welcome, Bob.
Good evening. Thanks to the club for allowing me to tell you about the explorations I had with color photography. Really, this is digital art that starts with a camera and an image. So it's experimental exploration of abstract color manipulations. Bit of a mouthful, which is why I called it Hidden Colors. The tool I'm using principally is Faststone, which is a simple image viewer, does the basics of light and dark and contrast, and you can make negatives and crop things around. It's free for private use, although commercial use you should pay for it, and they accept donations are very welcome. I tend to use the color tool a lot because I get a lot of amusement out of it. I believe that such a tool exists in Lightroom and Photoshop and Affinity. In the Affinity version, there's even a CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So you have even more things to play with. The talk's divided into two parts. One is explaining color curve theory, and the second part is examples of what I've done with it. Color is something of a personal thing, and you might find my idea of color is a bit off, probably because I have a slight red-green deficiency. And in researching this, I came across a site describing variations of color blindness, which is quite interesting in itself. As a side note, apparently some people have 4 color receptors, women, I think 12%. They don't necessarily see more colors because the 4th receptor doesn't differ much from the green one, although there's a small number of women with this 4th receptor that apparently do see probably an extra color, probably interior decorators. Okay, first we have to do a little bit of theory. Just going to move to the next slide. Oh yeah. You might wonder why we would want to use the color tool. It basically does a lot of things with one manipulation. You can actually tune it to the particular image, namely adjust exactly where in the image the contrast takes place because you have a histogram. So you tend to maximize the slope in the part of the image you want. Sometimes that's the sky, sometimes it's something else. It's also, for me, a starting point for abstract photography. It tends to work best on shapes and images that aren't recognizable, so people don't get distracted by what the color should be, which is why it's quite good for abstract work. And some of the results can be quite surprising. Limitations of the tool as I use it, it works on the whole image, but I imagine maybe in some of the more advanced color programs, you can constrain it to work on a particular part. The tool is somewhat unpredictable, particularly when you set the control points, which is usually where the fun begins. You get really amazing things come out of it. It's also difficult to document because I can never repeat the steps I do unless I actually take a screenshot of the actual tool as it's in use. Also, some might consider it's a bit over the top because it produces weird things. The same complaint is usually made about HDR. Anyway, okay, a little bit of basics. The human eye basically has 3 color receptors, one for the red, one for green, and one for blue. And you see the spectrum down the bottom, which it goes from 700 nanometers up to 400. What I didn't realize until I start researching is there's a little bit of red down here, which gives you the appearance of indigo, namely that these very short wavelengths, both the red and the blue receptors in the eye work, and you get this nice indigo color, or able to see it. Okay, here is basically what we're doing. We have an image here, and it goes into a camera. In fact, this camera is actually the first SLR I ever had. It's a Praktika. So what the tool does is it takes the pixels from your camera and converts them to pixels for your screen. Normally it's a straight line, so bright pixels here, you can see the histogram, go up to the line and then get reflected across and become bright pixels in the image. Similarly, dark pixels, like here, go across and become dark pixels in the image. Now, when you want to reduce the contrast, what happens is you make the slope shallow. So light pixels come here and become somewhat light gray here. Dark ones become a darker shade of gray. So it compresses the range of pixels. Conversely, if you want to increase contrast, you take a narrow range of pixels at the bottom and they become expanded up here. So light gray gets turned to white and dark gray gets turned to black. So you can see the little picture here, the colors have become heightened compared to the original image down here. And you can even turn it inside out or reverse it. So white pixels here, whoops, gone one too far. Come back. No, we're going too far. There we go. So white pixels here get reflected off the line and become dark. Dark pixels get reflected off the line and become white. I'm just pausing because the Facebook side seems to be going a little bit behind. So that's basically what the program is doing, is converting pixels of one shade into pixels of another shade for you. Now, this is where the fun begins. You can actually bend the curve by putting points on it, these little dots, and then moving them around. So you can then take some random part of the curve and project it to another part. This is a somewhat extreme thing. So you can see the colors down here become not necessarily negative, but just switched around. Okay, that's the end of the torturing you with the theory part. Now we'll go on to some examples. Right. This screen here is actually the Faststone tool itself, and it looks like an file manager because Faststone just uses the computer's native directory structure. Gives you a list of folders. This is in my entire collection of pictures going back to 2001. And there's camera stuff, and then there's tonight's presentation and the folders for tonight. Just to give you an idea of what it does, I made this slide up showing the basic colors. You have your Ansel Adams, Fred Archer 10-zone system here, black all the way through to white, and then the same thing but for colors. So we have red fading through to green, and then fading through to blue, and then indigo at the end. So I can show you what the tool will do on colors. So where is it? Adjust curves. So that's your straight line. Now if I do reverse it, well, first of all, I've made everything white because all colors here get projected to white, which is not really useful for anything. But if we do this, everything was reversed. The whites are now black, and the blacks have become white. And all the colors get rearranged. So what was red is now the remaining two, blue and green, which comes out as cyan.
Bob, Paul
Yep.
over on Facebook is asking if you would care to elaborate on what the Ansel Adams 10-zone system is.
Oh. It's basically the Ansel Adams system of dividing the range of intensities into 10 zones, which is as much as I know about it. It's often I think the idea is I'll stop there. All I know is that it involves 10 zones and you can decide how much contrast in each one. All I've done here is make these patches correspond to, say, all white, 10% black, 20% black, and so on to 100% black. Okay. I'll reverse it, put it back the way it was. So the curve is now normal, and you'll notice the grid here is divided into 10 regions. If we wanted to increase the contrast, we could then pull that one down there, pull this one up here, and you see the curve has gotten steeper. But what's happened is that these 3 black zones have become black, and these ones here have become white because the gradient is now much steeper. And you'll notice on the color side, these 3 have become solid red, and there's solid green around here. So there's a narrower range. And if I go very extreme, let's get rid of these control points, you almost end up with black and white. Not particularly useful here. I'll reverse it. Okay, so that gives you some idea of what this graph tool is doing to your pixels that are coming out of the camera here and ending up on the screen here. Right. Now let's try this for a real image. Okay. You might wonder, how does this relate to your traditional color sliders? I can show you that. Here is a very dark image, and traditionally you would try and lighten it up. And the equivalent in curves is something like this. You've taken your dark pixels here and increase them a bit, and you'll see these little dots. They are control points, so I can sculpt the curve in quite fine detail. Here's an image, okay, that I wanted to brighten up. So that's the original, and then this is brightened up a bit, and now I move the control points to the bright side of the spectrum, and in theory you should be able to see an increase there. Now, a couple of presentations ago, one of the presenters finally explained to me what vibrancy is, and it's really just changing the curve in the middle. And that's what I've done here. I've just steepened up the curve in the middle, and you should see the wood colors a little more vibrant compared to that. So that's without, and that's with. Okay. Now this is where we get really more exciting. Here's the original pictures of some gourds, orange and sort of anemic orange, not particularly interesting. However, if we fiddle around with the curves, we can get something like this. Lots more colors come out. And that was done by taking the curve and then putting this sort of N shape into it. So I put some control points in and then stretch them around, and we end up with something like that. Another version of the gourds, slightly different, and fiddle around with the control points. Again, a similar N curve, and we get something like this. But also you can go in completely different directions by changing some of the individual curves, as well as doing RGB, which changes them all at once. You can then change individual curves, and you can see that the blue curve, which is the dotted one on the left, is peaked right at the left side, which is the dark pixels. So they've become very bright. And then the green curve is sort of peaked in the middle a bit. And for no good reason, I made the red curve follow the histogram, which is putting the control points here and lined up along the red histogram. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So if we go back to the original, you can see where the blue points. Is that the one? Which is the original for this? Oh, it's this one. It's just that because it's been cropped a bit, I've got a bit unhinged. So these points in here, the dark points, became blue because the dark pixels down here got greatly amplified. No, I don't want to do that. I'll leave azaleas for a bit.
Paul is asking, am I correct that any of these extreme color curve manipulations would be allowed for club contests, but at risk of the judge distaste for such manipulations?
Paul has hit the nail on the head. I have presented these, and the reaction varies from a few chuckles from the membership to some groans. And quite often when I'm doing this, my wife will lean over my shoulder and say, no. It is an acquired taste. Some judges haven't acquired it yet. Okay, this is a contraption. It's actually part of a bomber aircraft, and I think it's the mechanism that holds the bombs or something or other. Anyway, I was fiddling around with it because I wanted to get a bit color into it. And I ended up with that. And you might wonder, how on earth do you get those colors out of that? And the answer is pure luck. Here you can see the blue curve. I expanded a bit. Okay. The blue curve is going every which way. I didn't do that intentionally. I put this point in and then this point, and then I wanted to move this curve a bit. And by accident, I inserted another point and the thing went nuts. What's really happening is there's an algorithm that tries to fit a mathematical curve through all the points in a smooth fashion. And the only way it could do that was to go up and down like this and so on. And as it happened, this is the end result. I thought, well, that's quite neat. I'll just keep it. And I then fiddled around with the red curve and the green curve a little bit just to adjust for taste, so to speak. Here are some other versions of it. What you can get is you get some of these little pockets of bright colors where there's a lot of natural contrast. Maybe the original image has going from black to white quite quickly. By the time it's been processed through the curves, you end up with little pockets of color like that. Whoops, come back. If that's not enough, you can then turn it to black and white and enhance various structures, and you end up with something like this. This is sort of like a technique called solarizing, which used to be practiced in the darkroom, where halfway through the developing process, you might flash the light on, you might take the paper out of the developer or slosh a bit more developer in, and it disturbed the normal process of black and white printing. like fiddling with colors, it was a somewhat unpredictable process, but you can get some amazing things. And this is a version of it. Right. Cogwheels is another one. Okay. This is the original. And here's a gray black and white version. Moderately interesting. But then we colorize it and you end up with this. And I know that at least one person in the universe likes it because I got a like in Flickr on this particular image today, purely by accident. Again, you can then render it in black and white, or you can then keep going and colorize the black and white image. Or you can make a negative of it, whatever turns you on, whatever you fancy doing. One thing to note with, come back, there we go. With grayscale images, there is still color there. All that's happened is the three color curves, red, green, and blue, have been lined up to be equal to each other. And I'll demonstrate that by taking them apart. So here's RGB, all colors together. There's the red group, green group, and blue group. And you see the histogram is the same for each. But what happens if we change them? It'll be dramatic. So that'll be the red one. And then we'll take the green one and reverse it. So I already got two colors out of it. And what can we do with blue? We'll just put something like that on it. So you can see by rearranging each of the color channels, you actually get the colors out of it. That actually isn't very successful, so we'll get rid of that. Let's go back to the originals. This is actually where I started this whole technique off, or started exploring it. This is the original image, which is a bunch of dresses hanging on a rack in Ellicott City about 6 years ago. And I was just caught by these. So the first thing to do is to crop it, because I didn't want the hangers, and turn it upside down. So we did that. So now we have the lots of shapes, swirls, but the colors are sort of bland. So now we fiddle around with the color tool. Now we're getting somewhere. And this is how that was done. Basically, a radical N shape. But mostly it's the RGB channel that I manipulated. I did a little bit of the blue and the red, mostly because I was trying to reproduce the original. And this is almost like the original, not quite. And this is because the original, I didn't take a picture or a screenshot of the shape of the curve. But I turned it around and then folded it to finally produce that. And I did actually show that at club once, and it got various reactions. Now, sometimes I can actually do something in a controlled fashion with a desired result. This is an image of a ceiling of a building in New York, in the financial center. And I was intrigued by the design of the little black and white squares. It also looks a bit like a nuclear reactor. So to make it look more like a nuclear reactor, we fiddle around to make the inner part red, as though it's about to go critical. And this is another variation, still keeping the red in the middle, but then somehow managing to get cyan or blue on the edges. And then if you want, you can then turn it black and white or solarize it by taking the color images and making a grayscale out of them. Similar manipulation here. This is taken at Udvar-Hazy Air and Space. It's an propeller and engine, and the camera has been rotated during the exposure, so you get this swirling effect. And some interesting shapes here, but they're not much in the way of color. So you fiddle around with the curves and get that. And this is how that was done. The RGB curve does most of the work, and the green and the red were tweaking it up. Again, I was trying to reproduce the original, which is this one. Where it come back? That actually did quite well at club contest. But as you can see, I haven't been able to reproduce it exactly, although I think this version with reds and yellows up here is actually the more interesting one. Here is something with boats. This is down at the Inner Harbor by the Museum of Industry. This is taken at dusk with a long exposure. And that's a gray version, not particularly interesting. But by working the curves, I can bring out a lot more color. And at the time, I actually bothered to document it, so I had some idea how this was put together, probably in anticipation of this. And there's another color version. And now you can turn it to black and white by just setting it to grayscale. You've got something much more dramatic compared to that. Right. Okay. This one was in Ellicott City after the flood. This is a pumping set used to get rid of some of the flood water. I was more interested in all this detail here. So that's a black and white version of it, a bit sort of flat. Here is a negative. It lacks a bit of drama here. You can see the color, the white inside, as though there's something going on inside, but I think we can do better than that. So we fiddle around with the curves. I'll just do here so you can see what the come back. And here I use a V-shaped curve, and it enhances the reds and greens, and there's a lot more contrast in all the components. And then when we put that to black and white, we're getting a little closer to what I want, but the whites are not that bright. They're still a bit dull. The blacks are a bit grayish. So finally, we just enhance the black and white image to bring out this bright whites and darks in here, which is what I was after. And that was done by making the middle part steeper and also bringing the black point here. So the blacks are really black. Come back. So that's a way to solarize an image. So we can compare that one to the original gray, which is somewhat weak in comparison.
Julie is asking, do you convert to black and white and then adjust the curve?
You could. I don't do it that way. I find I get more exciting results by fiddling around when it's still a color image and then converting to black and white. But you can try it. The great thing about this is it's all experimental. I'm just showing folk what I've done, but I'm still learning or perfecting the technique. In fact, just today I was fiddling around with some pictures I took of azaleas, and well, I might as well touch on them. This was the original, which is a bit dull. So I put an N shape on, something like that. Now it looks like something from Mordor, or Deadly Nightshade or something like that. But occasionally I can be gentle with my curves. Here's the original, and I just highlighted the red and the blue, but what it did was enhance the green comes out a little bit more. So that's the original. And then the green is a bit brighter, which struck me as odd because I didn't touch the green at all. And what's happening, I think, is that you're de-accentuating the red and the blue so the green stands out. But the way I did it, I'll show you. Where is it? There's curves. Is normally I just jerk something around like that and all hell breaks loose. But this time I figured I'll pin one point, say there, and then just pull the curve down so it pivots about a chosen point, which is a much more delicate way of doing it, or going the other way. No, don't expand. And instead of, I could then pick another point here and pull this down, so I can do gentle manipulations as opposed to my usual extreme versions. No, I don't think that works. So I got like that. That makes it softer. One thing I find is that if the curve tends to be shallow, you get this muddy gray effect and it's not much fun. You tend to want to go the other way, particularly in the middle of the image. But the price you pay is that if the curve is steeper in the middle, it tends to be shallower at each end, but hopefully there's not much information there and that you can live with that. All right, let's get rid of that. So that was fiddling around with azaleas. We've done that one. Here's another case of where I'm using the curve just to fine tune a part of the color space. Here's the original, which is a bit sort of grayish. What I wanted to do is highlight the breast feathers of these two little birds, which is shown here. And that was done by steepening up this part of the curve, but then the whites at the top here got bright, so I put some control points and pulled them down a bit. I think I sort of improved the birds without the white here being too blown out. This is a work in progress, and at some point I'm going to do something with all the white stuff. Okay, now this is a very interesting picture. It was taken in the afternoon at Fort Smallwood about a month ago. So it's all blue and a bit flat. But what's really interesting is the histogram for it. It consists of 3 spikes, one for red, one for green, and one for blue. So I thought, well, what if I take each of the color curves and stretch them across, maximize them across their own color. So I would take the red curve and stretch it across here and so on for green and blue. And that's what was done here. So I take the red curve and start it at the beginning of the red space, and the red space ends here, so I put the red curve there. So all the red pixels are being stretched across the full space of red. And similarly, the green ones, I do the same, and the same for the blue, which I don't actually show, but you can see from this where the green ones would be and the blue ones would be. So each color channel is stretched across its full range. What you end up with is a reasonable approximation of the moon at night. It's a bit bright, so I just toned down the darks, and as a final thing, rendered it grayscale again. Still not as good as Fred's images of the moon, but possible. But it's funny how you can go from this image to that image. I don't think I could do that with the regular sliders, because the regular sliders will treat all colors the same, whereas here each color has been treated specifically according to its own histogram. Right. I think that is about it. Where's that one? Oh, this is where it doesn't work, or I don't particularly like the end results. Here is some cogwheels, which is largely black and white. And I wanted to make it something more interesting. And all I seem to be able to get out of it is red and blue, or cyan and red, and various things that didn't work. Most of the time, I'm only showing you the successes. I wanted to show you this to keep myself honest and show you why it sometimes doesn't work, even when you put radical curves on. The silk mill. This is another attempt to get something interesting in terms of colors. This is from the silk mill out in Western Maryland. And I thought, well, there's not much color in the original, so I'll turn it gray, which is sort of a bit dull. That one didn't do much. Well, maybe getting a bit better. That's another attempt at it, and so on. But then I turned it to solarize it. Now I get bright whites, which seem to be coming from within the structure, which was kind of interesting, even though you're not supposed to have white images. And just for fun, I made a negative out of it. But you can see there's still some colors. There's blues here, traces of indigo, and things like that. Right, there we are. That's playing around with colors. Any questions, comments?
Over on Facebook, Scott had explained the Ansel Adams zones. Ansel Adams use of 10 zones is a variation of a black and white grayscale that contained 255 colors from solid black to solid white. Printers used a grayscale to adjust ink, assuring that a picture wouldn't have too much or too little contrast. Adams reduced this to 10, the most important ones as he saw it, to calculate his black and white exposures.
Ah, there you have it. Thank you, Scott.
Do we have any other questions for Bob?
Right. I'm just reading
Larry,
Lewis's.
Larry asks, is the curve information saved when you save the file?
No, not that I know of. Actually, I can give you a quick tour of Faststone itself. As you see, it uses the folders on your disk. And you can make up folders any which way. I just make folders by year, and then within a year, I have folders for each activity. And then you click on the image you want, and it opens up. What's interesting about this tool is it uses the entire screen for the image, and the controls are all on the side. So you slide your mouse around, and then a panel shows up for the particular controls you want to do. So here are all my light adjustments. I can do lighting. And then I have the usual sliders down the bottom. Contrast. Lack of contrast. I can then do light and shadows, so on and so forth. And I can keep the settings. So if I have a whole bunch of images that all need the same process, it will remember those from one image to the next, which can be convenient. Then, of course, there's the curve tool, where I can do all this kind of mischief. I can zoom in and zoom out. And when I've done, I would then just save an image, and I get to choose the name. Then I can go back to the list of images, which is here. Then there I can zoom into 100%, move it around. So
Over on Facebook, Lewis says in Photoshop and Lightroom, you can be specific on the part of the image in the color panel. One is hand tool and the other is bullseye. Paul says in a tool such as Lightroom, such edits would be saved in the Lightroom database.
Okay, yeah. Faststone isn't that sophisticated. There is one tool I do like. I can compare two images. So if I select them both, compare, and if they're similar and I want to see which one has the better focus, I can do a side by side, and then I can say zoom up to 200%. I can see, okay, since these aren't that similar, they're not quite the same, but I could see this say would be fuzzier than this one. I can then just delete that and move on. That would be a good example of that. Okay, yesterday's azaleas would be good. Ah, here would be an example. I'd select these two. They're virtually identical. Tool, compare images, blow it up to say 200%. And I could say, okay, this one looks sharper on this particular thing than this one. I'm going to delete this and move on. Yeah, and here I can see that this piece here is sharper than this piece here. So this one's rubbish. Get rid of it. And you can do up to 4 images that way. So for as a quick way of slimming down your workload, I use that.
Susan says the curves changes become a part of the changed image, but when you go back to that image, there is a new histogram, but the starting point of the diagonal line is reset to the default.
Correct, yeah. Because the saved image, it treats as a new image, and when you bring up the tool, it's in its default mode, which is straight diagonal line. The curve tool is the one that the program doesn't remember from image to image. The sliders it does. There's an option in sliders. So if I do levels, I can then keep settings, which means that it'll remember those settings from one image to the next if I choose to. You also have a straighten tool. So if I wanted to, I could straighten on that. Or I could then move a slider around, so I can do simple things like that. And in the preview window, I can change the size of the previews depending on how much I want to do things like that. Okay, that's a brief view of Faststone, simple as it is.
Lewis says this presentation has made me work on the curves panel. I have avoided it.
Oh, good. That was the whole point. Allows people to explore that tool.
Joe Barnes says, I use Faststone too, but only for viewing images. Thank you for showing me other usages for the program.
There you go. Excellent.
Do we have any? Fred says, I use Faststone too, but only for viewing images. Thank you for showing me other usages for the program.
You're welcome. Right.
Let me see if there are any more questions. Paul says he has also avoided the curves panel.
Oh, well, now you know what to do with it.
Do you use any other programs to edit images or just Faststone?
I started playing with Affinity. I use, what's the one for doing 3D stuff? Helicon Focus for doing stacking. I also use Paint Shop, mostly because I've been using it for years, long before I joined the club. And I can do spot fixing of defects, like taking out little filaments. It's very much, I think, like Photoshop, just not Photoshop. It comes from Corel. It has layers, but I haven't learned how to do layers yet. Usually I can just copy a piece of an image from one to the other and then blend it in, and that seems to work for the limited stuff I do.
Sometimes using layers can help you not destroy your original image and be able to go back to it, in my experience.
Yes. Oh yeah, no, no. What I do is I tend to save things as I go along. When I made an edit, I save it and then keep going. And I usually stick an A on the end of the name and then an SH for sharp and then a B and a C and so on. So I end up with a series of images, but I always keep the original untouched. I haven't lost anything serious so far.
That's good. Let me
Okay.
I'm not getting any other questions yet. Let me double check. And thank you so much for joining us tonight, Bob, and explaining this tool that so many people seem to be afraid to experiment with or use. And it was very interesting to learn more about the curves.
Okay, you're welcome.
A big thank you for everyone who has joined us tonight. And join us next week for our business meeting. Remember that the meeting will not be streamed to Facebook. You must sign in and participate so that we can make important decisions for the next year. Everyone have a good evening, and Bob, stay around for a couple minutes, and everyone else,
Sure.
we will see you next week. Goodbye.